Welcome back to Season 2 of That's So Second Millennium, the Catholic Science podcast, where we look forward to the new synthesis in the new millennium between faith, philosophy, and science. Welcome back to episode 67 of That's So Second Millennium. This is the third and final part of our interview with Maureen Condic. Bill kicks us off by shifting the discussion back from the culture of scientists to the culture at large. Maureen discusses the difficulties of, for example, arguing people out of a position they didn't argue themselves into. She goes on to talk about how people's viewpoints change when their experiences change, including a lawyer who found himself shifting from the pro-choice side to facing the question of working on a fetal pain lawsuit. Bill asks a little bit more about fetal pain versus the heartbeat side of the argument, and Maureen tries to carefully draw some nuances in terms of both the biology and the philosophy of what's going on there. We get back at the end to talk about twinning a little bit, which is just fascinating to me for all the reasons I explained in the last episode. We also talk some about the extreme complexity in human sexual dimorphism. So the question of the hormones that govern the growth of our external visible anatomy to our hormonal sex interiorly, how it affects our attitudes and a whole bunch of other things. And then, of course, the sense of gender. And even that doesn't do justice to the entire complexity. So some intriguing stuff about twinning, sexuality, and people's thoughts and attitudes, and whether they're rational or not about arguments about sexuality and identity. So without any further ado, our final piece of the Maureen Condic interview.
And does that phenomenon in the scientific world have an analog in the political and policy world, such that people don't want to...
The phenomenon in the scientific world is a subset of the general human tendency, the legacy of original sin, whatever you want to call it.
Right. But it does seem to help explain the intractability of things like the abortion debate.
I think, not that we should open up the topic of abortion, but I think many things contribute to this, including people's unwillingness to look squarely at the facts, people's willingness to immediately turn a presentation of the facts into an ad hominem attack.
Yeah.
That if you're going to assert that a human embryo is a human person or a human being, you're just saying that because,
right?
Because you're Catholic, because you're an ideologue, because
you're a hater or a shamer or something.
Shamer, that's right.
Yeah.
So we can throw a name at you because you've said something that makes it challenging for us to maintain the position that we like. But that's not all of it. It seems like people wake up in the morning and suddenly find themselves a pro-abortion person. I mean, people wake up in the morning and they find themselves a person who's very, very sympathetic to women and wants women's freedom to be optimized and wants to make a level playing field in the economic world.
Yeah.
Maybe they wake up and find that somebody they know is in a crisis pregnancy and doesn't know what to do and is suffering. That's how people wake up.
Yeah.
And they formulate their views on abortion based on those experiences, not on the facts.
Yeah.
I mean, and those are different. Well, I mean, not all of those are factual, but the situation of waking up and yes, this person I know is in a crisis pregnancy. Yes, and what are all the societal factors that went into governing why she had a sexual encounter with this person when she doesn't want to be pregnant? What causes that? And we don't want to look at that either.
Well, it's just tough. I think, the ongoing debates over complicated topics like this are, I'm fond of saying you can't reason people out of a position they didn't reason themselves into in the first place.
No.
And when people find themselves supporting a particular position out of emotional life experiences and out of conviction and out of beliefs that perhaps they've never really questioned, you can't, laying out the facts for someone like this doesn't help them.
Yeah.
But is there still real value in having those facts
Oh yeah.
laid out.
Oh yeah. I
it's
do my best. I fly all over the world, and with for food. try to talk to people about these topics because
we'll talk for food and plane tickets.
Food and plane tickets. Yes. Because it does help people to have the information laid out for them. And on this particular topic, on the question of when life begins, there's actually a relatively simple and uncontroversial answer to it. A lot of the controversy gets manufactured when you move up from the question of when does human life begin to the question of when does that life have value? Mm-hmm. When is it subject of rights? Yeah. And that's a political question, not a scientific question.
Yeah.
And it's an ethical and moral question.
Yeah.
And that's really what the rubber meets the road. I mean, I think that it's actually been fairly encouraging in the last 15 years that the scientific arguments about this used to be very, very shrill. A lot of people asserting there's no consensus in the field and no one knows, and fertilization is a process and development is a continuum, and yet a lot of that has dropped away. And even the most honest people on both sides are willing to say, yeah, sure, it's a human being, but we deny rights to human beings all the time. And,
That's right.
We do. And so maybe this is a case where the rights of the mom trump the rights of the fetus or the embryo.
Yeah.
And that to me is a step forward, because that's an honest debate. I mean, that is
when you put it out on the table,
debate.
This is what we're actually doing.
Yeah, we're not talking about clumps of cells and all the other nonsense that it's just disinformation. I mean, it's completely false. Yeah. We're now actually debating something that, I mean, I still think there's only one clear answer to this question, but it can be debated. Yeah. I mean, we do deny rights to people based on all sorts of criteria.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, and we deny responsibilities to people because they're not able to absorb them, which I don't know where I'm going with that comment, but that's I mean,
are you hopeful about resolution? No, not necessarily the abortion debate. I don't want to get political either, but these kinds of things that really are scientifically based, but also with all of the complications that come with human nature, and all of that is it sounds like you think we are making some progress, or could make some progress, because there are unrecognized areas of agreement.
I think I am optimistic that in the end, the battle has already been won. We have the resurrection.
Right.
And as much as it doesn't feel this way, we are in the end game. The forces of darkness will be defeated. And we just have to play our part. So maybe my part is I like to communicate. I have a great love for the human embryo and for embryology in general, and just the magic of what happens. And I have a great respect for the truth and for facts, for evidence. And I want the debate to be on that level.
Right.
And so I have seen it move more so that way. And I think that's a complicated thing. I think women have become much more sophisticated, largely due to ultrasound. People, the whole ball of cells things really isn't working. And when people can see, what's inside there, and what it looks like, and and people are, they get there. They get there slowly. I'll tell you another story. I had a great. I tell this story a lot because, unlike the one that makes me want to cry, this one always makes me want to laugh.
Right.
I had an attorney contact me once to question whether I would be willing to testify on the topic of fetal pain.
Okay. In
a lawsuit against a hospital for wrongful death, and a component of the lawsuit was suing on behalf of the fetus who had been inappropriately aborted.
Right.
Or so the claim went. And so you get better damages if there was pain and suffering involved, right? So he wanted to know when, in fetal development, you would have a likelihood of having an experience of pain. And the attorney was very uncomfortable contacting me. I think uncomfortable with the case in general. but spent a long time propping up his credentials as a feminist and pro women, and he had been an abortion litigator for decades and prosecuted dozens of cases. And he has the firm conviction that a woman had a right to an abortion no matter what at any time under all circumstances. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay.
Do you have any idea who you're talking to?
Doing this case, so something changed. What was the change? He goes, well, I got married and we had a kid, and I saw the ultrasound at 20 weeks. Did you know he had fingers at 20 weeks? I'm looking at this. Okay, I'm like an embryologist,
right.
Besides that, you're a JD who has spent, by your own admission, a decade prosecuting, and you never bothered, never once, to actually look at like a high school textbook of human development. To know that they have fingers at 20 weeks. Are you out of your mind? They have fingers at 5 weeks. But it was news to him, and he was an educated person. And a person who had ample motivation to look into the facts. But what compelled him to finally do it? An emotional reason.
Right.
An emotional reason. He had a motivation of curiosity about himself and about his own progeny.
Right.
And he wanted to know something about it for the first time. And for the first time, it was decoupled from the assumptions, from the firmly held convictions he had about a woman's right to abortion at any time. He actually needed the facts. And so that is where the truth comes out. When people recognize they need the facts.
But that there's some room for both the facts and the emotional side, the experiential side. Is that right? Maybe that's the real challenge, to find that happy middle
even
ground.
more complex than a philosopher and a scientist writing a book together.
Exactly. But
Wow.
it does give one hope that conversations can be held that combine the two. But our culture and everything about fundraising by groups and activists and all of that, they militate against those kinds of more complex conversations.
Okay, but we can promote it. We as humans need to spend more time listening and asking questions than lecturing. I think when I encounter people who have very, very different views than I do on this, my first question is, can you help me understand why? Why you feel that way about this? What is motivating you, and how aware are you of the facts? And did the facts actually change anything? If it wasn't about cells, would that? I mean, if it had fingers, really, would that make it any different?
That's the bottom line. For some it would, for some it wouldn't.
Some it wouldn't. And this is actually why, as much as I really don't think it's a good argument scientifically, the fetal pain question is so compelling to people, because it appeals to their sense of empathy and to their sense of emotion. And so even if it's human and it was anesthetized, would you care if it was? No, it's not feeling pain, right? I mean, would that be a problem? I would still have a problem because of the human part. I wouldn't feel good about. I don't feel good about capital punishment just because prisoners are anesthetized before they're put to death. I don't feel good about it because I don't think we should be killing humans.
But it's not something that if we have any other option, we should be doing. Then we have other options today.
It's interesting that the fetal pain argument tends more toward the emotional side of the conversation, and the heartbeat argument that's now prominent in some state debates, I think, aims more toward the factual side.
I think they're both. I think the heartbeat argument, because it's so much earlier in development, is trying to counteract the ball of cells things. It's pointing to, as we talked earlier, the kind of concept of an organism, and what is an organism except something that is self-directing its own maturation. And the fact that one of the earliest physiologic needs of the developing embryo is to have an adequate circulation, so you turn on heart development really, really early in the embryonic process. So by 24, 25 days in human development, you have heartbeat. And it's very primitive.
What time is implantation?
Implantation is about 6-7 days.
Okay. So in that fairly long span of time in between there, is it really kind of like the mother's blood pressure driving? I mean, I'm sorry. How do the nutrients, the oxygen, is it simply able to diffuse across the?
So you establish a very primitive placental circulation, an exchange. I don't want to say circulation. An exchange between the mom and the developing embryo right away. So by a few days after, even immediately as implantation is happening, you start that process. But at that stage, the embryo is so tiny. Passive diffusion does a lot.
Yeah.
So you don't really.
Your surface area to volume ratio is nice and high.
Yeah, very, very, very favorable to.
Yeah.
So and you start developing an actual placental circulation driven by a very, very primitive heart in the embryo right away because growth just demands it. You start requiring a more efficient way of getting oxygen to all the bits and getting all the bad stuff out.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, and that's the beauty of talking. That's the beauty of doing this and talking to people in radically different scientific subfields.
Yes.
Yeah. So I, of course, have the personal story about twinning that my mother's parents were both identical twins.
Both mom and dad?
Yes, her mother and her father were both identical twins, and the other members of the pair also married each other. So my mother's family is this big genetics experiment they conducted during the war.
Wow.
And to realize that is the process that happened to both of them, both pairs of them. Oh, okay.
Any other friends in your family?
Identical twins on my mother's side. I'm not sure. I know a pair on my father's side. I mean, they're second cousins that I just happen to know better than my 300 other second cousins for very random reasons. But not. I don't. Yeah,
I'm curious
they haven't had any.
There's always been a conventional belief based largely on lack of cases that there's not a genetic component to identical twinning.
Right.
And a recent scholarly review of medical cases has presented a few families where there does appear to be a genetic component. But it's very controversial at this point. So I'm always on the lookout for familial
I do not
twinning running in families.
Neither my mother's family, my mother, her siblings, nor her genetic siblings have of their descendants. I'm not aware of any identical twins. But So I always think about that, and now I know that it was not my. I shouldn't blame my high school biology textbook. It probably just didn't say. Yeah. But I always just assumed, the two cells just split apart. No, it's much more exciting than that.
It is. If you watch the videos, it's very compelling process.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of evidence that the cells of the early embryo are very, very sticky, and they're constrained within this protein coat, this chemicals that we talked about. People have directly tested this idea by through manipulation, making in mice binobular eggs, so two mature eggs inside the same zone of Belusa. And then you fertilize them so you get fraternal twins. And what happens is they fuse into a single twin.
A chimera.
Wow. And in fact, when we make chimeras in the laboratory, we do it exactly that way. We take early embryos, dissociate their cells, put them all back together again, and now you get a single individual coming out of those fused early embryonic cells. And this actually happens also, in the wild, as you say. Right. We do get chimeric humans, sometimes even fraternal, a male and a female twin who fuse to produce one chimeric individual who has 50% male cells and 50% female cells. So that and many other lines of evidence, and the fact that the negative evidence of never observed twinning at the 2-cell stage actually happened. All strongly suggest that even if, for some reason, the first 2 cells decided they wanted to go off independently of each other and make their own embryonic trajectories, they would be an male factor.
Because they're confined inside that.
In the zone, they would just...
The tendency is toward fusion. The tendency is not toward fission.
Right. And especially because at about the 16 cell stage, there's a change in the property of the early cells of the embryo that requires them to adhere to each other much more tightly.
Oh, okay.
So this process is called compaction. And you can actually see it happen. If you watch a movie, you start out with something that looks kind of like a mulberry, and then it all just clumps back into a big clump. Mm-hmm. And the biologic function of this, to make a teleological argument, is that you establish tight junctions among all of the cells of the early embryo, and that allows for unidirectional fluid transport into the inside.
Okay.
So now this little clump of cells blows up into a blastocyst, sort of this fluid for the soccer ball, and allows for the segregation of cells into those first two developmental pathways: the cells that are on the outside that are going to contribute to the placenta, and the cells on the inside that are going to contribute to the placental body. So that process of compaction almost precludes the possibility of twinning until you get out of the zona. Yeah. Because those cells, even if there were two embryos inside, once their cellular properties change and they adhere to each other, they make a single entity.
They would glue back together and be a non-chimeric chimera.
Right. They would be identical chimera. They would, we would still have the philosophical questions of what happened to the two souls and but I talk about chimeras in my book too.
There you go. Yeah, we'll definitely make sure to put both of those, list those in the liner notes.
Yeah. And does that form part of some scientific basis for arguments in the political realm that we know of as LGBTQ and multiple genders?
Oh, gosh. Oh, man. I think we were not going to talk about
I'm sorry.
There's the biological side of, if you have a male-female chimera, how does that manifest in terms of their phenotype once they're...
It depends in part on the ratio of cells that are male and female. Yeah. So the broader question of is there an actual biological basis for people's different kinds of gender identities? There's a very small population of individuals who are what we call intersex disorders. So people who actually have either genetically compound sexual identities, so they might have translocation of the Y chromosome to the X chromosome, and so partially male-female genotype, or many other variations on that thing. They may be hormonally intersex, so they might have normal male genetic sex, for example, and a fairly well-known intersex disorder is called androgen insensitivity, where you have normal male sex, genetic sex, so your XY, normal number of chromosomes, everything is normal on the genetic side, but you make normal amounts of hormones, but you have a mutation in the receptor for those hormones, for the male hormones, and so your body is insensitive to the production of male hormones. Wow. And as a consequence, you develop as female.
Right.
Wow.
So these are women that look almost completely normal women, but they have testicles and a genetic sex of a man.
Wow.
They have testicles embedded in their
the testicles
abdomen.
don't descend. Yeah. So they usually have to have them surgically removed because there's a high chance of cancer for testicular cancer at high temperature, so at body temperature. So which is exactly why testicles normally live where they do.
Yes. Yes. Reasons for all of these things. Yes.
So
that's so bizarre. That's a strange little detail. Yeah.
But there and then many variations on this thing. So there are individuals who actually do have ambiguous sexual identity, or conflicting because development of normal sexual anatomy is a really, really complicated. Yeah. I mean, the medical students is always the most challenging set of lectures that we do with human development because you have your genetic sex, you have your hormonal sex. So if you are genetically female but you have male hormones for a variety of reasons that can happen, you develop the male. And then you have your phenotypic sex, so what you look like on the outside, which has to do with a different set of hormones.
Yeah.
So any one of those three components can be in disagreement with the others, and then throw into the possibility that chimeras can exist when people are mixed with male and female cells. Mosaics can exist where, if you have a normal male embryo, and normally when you divide, every cell gets exactly the same kind of chromosomes. But if you make a mistake early on in development, and one cell of the two that are produced from the cell division gets both Y chromosomes, then you would have a 45X in the remaining cell. That's a female cell with Turner syndrome. And you'd have 47XYY,
which is
in the other, which is Edwards syndrome.
Edwards, not Klinefelter. I forget what there's too many of them.
There are too many of them, and I forget them.
And they're completely arbitrary, just like mineral names.
Yeah, some guy who discovered this the first time. But and then half of the cells would be normally genetic male cells, half of them would be male cells with an extra Y chromosome, and a quarter would be abnormal female cells with no second X. So that person would be a mix of genetic cell types, but if they are all from themselves, they didn't arise from fusion with somebody else.
Right. Wow.
So there are lots of ways that you can get intersex disorders, but the vast majority of people who have gender disorder, different, range of gender identifications, are people who are physically completely normal.
Then all three of those, genetic, hormonal, and exterior, are therein. Those are in agreement. It's a psychological. That's a different question.
Yep. A very, very different question. So, whether there's then a biological basis to that psychological perspective, that I think we're still out. The jury is still out on that one.
Yeah. And the atmosphere that we live in is not conducive to studying that with a disinterested quest for the actual facts. I can hardly imagine.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it's a curious thing whether or not the LGBTQ population would endorse that kind of a study or not. I mean, it used to be for many, many years, for example, there was a push to find the gay gene, something that allowed homosexual individuals to say, well, look, I was just born this way. It's genetic. Yeah. The community has kind of moved against that now, and because they don't want to believe it's deterministic, they want to believe that gender is fluid and people can pick whoever they want, and it really has nothing to do with biology. It's people are free to have whatever orientation you like, and
how dare you tell me that biology is destiny?
Right, kind of like that, yes. Yeah. And I think that's much more the dominant view right now, that there's much less of a push to try to find a biological basis for people's orientations and identities than just simply accepting that they exist. Yeah. And I have a right to have it if that's what I want.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have a right to have it without consequence X, Y, or Z, and with support P, Q, and R.
We've got kind of far afield on this one.
Yeah. Well, that's
fascinating.
I mean, we have been here for an hour and a half. You've been very indulgent of letting us continue to ask questions and extend the It will always be a red letter day for the reasons I mentioned in terms of, I learned how identical twinning actually works today.
There we go.
That really, I'm still kind of reeling from that.
That is my argument. I'm not sure if you would agree, but I think it's a very sustainable argument.
Yeah.
And I think it actually solves a lot of the philosophical problems. Because at that point, at that late of a stage, say day 5, when I think 4 or 5 when most twinning happens, or all, you've clearly established yourself as an organism, as a developing human that's moving towards a greater stage of maturation. Yeah. And then what happens when the embryo splits at that point is regeneration. That we are very good at repairing ourselves from injury, and so you get a catastrophic injury, you lose half of your body, and you replace it. Yeah. And the fact that each of the house does this, is where people's brain starts bending. So who's the original twin? But if you simplify the question, if you split an embryo in half and you throw away one half, and watch what happens to the surviving half. The surviving half acts like any organism acts when it's wounded. It repairs itself. So it tries to reestablish the original number of cells that were there in each of the various parts of the embryo at that stage of development. It heals itself, it reseals back into a ball. And if you watch the development of this half embryo compared to unsplit sibling controls in an animal model, it advances exactly in synchrony with the unsplit twins. So there's not even a pause. It just keeps running. It keeps doing exactly what it was doing before you split it.
Wow.
And it's just half the size.
Yeah.
And that argument to me, or that observation, would very strongly support the conclusion that you have a whole embryo, then you have a damaged embryo, and then you have a regenerated or a healed embryo.
Yeah.
And it's the same embryo because it started along this process at spermic fusion.
Yeah.
It set up all the things that it's doing now, and it continues doing them without any perceptible pause. So my conclusion from that would be splitting an embryo at that stage constitutes an injury, and the embryo regenerates, recovers from that injury, but it's the same individual throughout that entire process. Okay, so what about the other half?
Right. Yeah.
Now, the status of the other half, the status of the first half we just considered, is in no way dependent upon the as of yet undetermined status of the second half, but either way. I mean, logically, they're completely separate.
Yeah.
So now when we turn to the consideration of the second half, there's also no evidence that the original embryo died. All we're left with is the challenge of knowing which of those two twins is the original and which is the newly generated sibling. And the fact that we can generate a sibling at that stage seems unfamiliar to us, but it's well within what happens in biology in many, many, many species.
Really?
Yeah, asexual reproduction. You can chop an earthworm in half and you get two earthworms that are genetically identical to each other because both of them heals itself and continues on. And no one would argue that there are two, that single earthworm is not an individual, or that there's somehow two earthworms packed inside of one, and just because it could get cut by my shovel and I'm gardening.
Right. Yeah.
So the same thing is true of us, and I think that the most reasonable interpretation of twinning is that one of the twins is the original, one of them is a newly generated individual that comes into existence at that moment of splitting.
Yeah.
I will definitely be again, like I said, with my intrinsic interest in the subjects for understanding my own history, definitely be looking into that book. So,
great.
I think we should look back.
Yeah, I think we should.
Thank you so much.
Put that there. We appreciate it. That's probably 3 episodes worth of material there. So that's a wealth of.
Have fun.
We don't usually trick guests.
I think it's the first time we've done that. But,
it's the kind of thing that just once you get started, it's then there's this, and then there's this.
Yeah.
But this is why biology is just so fascinating because it is to some extent self-exploration.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the fields of science where you're really asking questions about your own nature, about who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that can help people. Whenever there's a hood, I must say, anyone who has twinning in their background is always more interested in twinning.
They're always more interested in twinning, yes. You can identify that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll read it and then I'll send it to Katie and Christy because they will probably,
Yeah, it should. I wrote the book. I'm hoping for kind of the educated non-scientist. It's you gotta be a little fearless and be willing to. Okay, I didn't understand that word, but I'm just going to flip over it. There is a glossary in the back.
That's what those are for.
And this non-scientist will read the one where the philosophers in dialogue.
Oh, that most assuredly that one too.
Yeah, definitely. That book is worth purchasing just for that first chapter that really goes through how Marxism and what does it mean and tries to explain why this isn't just a made-up idea. But if we don't have this, we can't do science. We really cannot. Intrinsically, scientists understand it. They don't recognize it, and they would call it hocus pocus. And
Right.
But it actually is necessary for us to do what we do.
Yeah. And you can either have it out consciously in front of you and be able to refer to it when you're in difficult situations, or you can just have it unconsciously in the background and stumble through and
then criticize anybody who actually has a better understanding than you do.
Right? Yeah, always that. That's human nature in a nutshell. Well, okay.
It is.
Yeah.
All
right. Well, thank you so
You're very,
much.
very welcome.
If you enjoyed this episode, or it made you think, please subscribe to That's So Second Millennium via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, or your podcast service of choice.